we're going to be right up on the border.
We're a reserve unit. We never really thought this would happen to us.
Let's go.
Price of the freedom and liberty, democracy.
It's something we needed to do for our country.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
Let's go.
The most important thing on the battlefield is the trooper.
They're well-trained, they're well-led, they're Americans, and only soldiers and small units win those battles.
It's the young soldiers on the ground making life and death and sometimes strategic decisions and doing it so incredibly well.
We had to draw a line again, and we came and we fixed it. I'm really proud of what my soldiers did.
We had confidence in our abilities, our equipment, our systems. There's always apprehension. You never knew what was around the next bend.
The tremendous, overwhelming response from our soldiers.
We're also fighting for the freedom of the oppressed people in Iraq. It's worth it to see it through until the end.
On the President's order, U.S. Army and coalition forces launched their attack on the brutal and dangerous regime of Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, moving faster and farther than any army in the history of warfare. From Kuwait to a staging area southwest of Karbala in just 3 days. From crossing into Iraq to the removal of the Ba'athist regime from Baghdad in just 17 days. To many, it looked a lot like the force that fought Desert Storm. But this was a very different army from the force that fought Desert Storm just 12 years earlier.
The Army is always changing. There's not a year that goes by that the Army's not changing.
Lieutenant General David McKiernan was a senior staff officer during Desert Storm. In Operation Iraqi Freedom, he was the Army's top general in Kuwait. With the end of the Cold War, the Army cut several 100,000 troops, and that meant the Army had to do more, much more, with less.
Between Desert Storm and OIF, the Army actually downsized considerably.
The Army became smaller, faster, more flexible, and more powerful. Testing and adopting information-based warfare, digitizing the force, improving communication,
okay, we'll try to get that shot up to you then.
and creating a digitally linked battle command system.
We have integrated a lot of the technology into the force that has provided us situational awareness beyond anything we ever imagined on a battlefield as dispersed as this country is.
And the Army placed a much broader emphasis on joint operations, both in doctrine and in practice.
In every case, we're looking to close with the enemy as quickly as we can.
Moving rapidly with a smaller force also means learning to fight on an open battlefield with many fronts and no rear area safe havens.
We are in an asymmetric battlefield, which means that the enemy can be anywhere.
After Desert Storm, the Army was engaged in hot spots around the world. In Somalia, using combat power to make possible humanitarian assistance. In Haiti, utilizing the tactical actions of soldiers. In Bosnia, soldiers used a series of small, precise blows to defeat an elusive threat indirectly over time. And in Kosovo, the air component produced the combat victory, However, the local residents would not return until ground forces secured the province. And then, the worst terrorist attack in history forever changed our world. Acting quickly and decisively, the United States and coalition partners attacked worldwide terrorism at its core. Operation Anaconda took the war on terror directly to the Taliban and Al-Qaeda hidden deep in the rugged mountains of eastern Afghanistan. Soldiers of the 10th Mountain Division and fabled 101st Airborne led the fight.
Soldiers went into that valley, a place where for 200 years no conquering army had ever been victorious, and some 9 days later came out victorious with no soldiers lost.
A major factor in the swift and decisive victory in Afghanistan was the extensive use of special operations forces, trained and ready to meet the challenges of a war with few boundaries. Their success against the enemy in Afghanistan would greatly expand their role in the next front in the war on terror, Iraq.
All I can say is that this country has suffered a lot, and he has seen horrible days during the 35 past years, and everybody was looking for something to happen.
Saddam's brutal and ruthless behavior in the years following Desert Storm made clear that Iraq posed a major threat to peace in the region and the world. During this period, plans were drawn and then redrawn to match the changing nature of the 21st century Army and the threat it faced. Innovations made smaller combat units more effective and more deadly, and that meant the size of the force needed to perform the mission also grew smaller. U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, under the leadership of General Tommy Franks, had overall responsibility.
To come up with a plan that all the components thought was the best balance of risk and reward. And what we saw executed beginning on about the 19th of March of 03 was that plan.
Leading the battle would be Lieutenant General David McKiernan, an officer very much in tune with the smaller, faster, more deadly Army of the 21st century.
There's been a huge improvement in capabilities even while the Army has gotten smaller.
Preparation for war included building training facilities in Kuwait.
We really built cities in the sand.
They call these cities Camps Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York, all named for states that were attacked on 9/11. Battalion-sized forces were rotated through these camps, gaining experience in desert warfare.
I've always been a huge believer in the adage that you will fight as you have trained.
Following that adage, Army units also engaged in extensive combat training at the Joint Readiness Training Center, Fort Polk, Louisiana. Geographically, Iraq covers just over 270,000 square miles, making it just slightly larger than Texas. It has a population of more than 25 million people, just a little more than Texas. In Operation Iraqi Freedom, the strategic objective was the capital, Baghdad, a modern city with a population of over 5 million people. But taking Baghdad meant urban warfare, which usually means high casualties on all sides. So the Army devised a plan to minimize casualties and urban destruction through precision attacks to paralyze the city without destroying it.
There they go. Got a good hit. Luger Octane 3.
Troop training in urban warfare increased. In the fall of 2002, the Army conducted a series of exercises. Selected National Guard and Army Reserve units began to be mobilized. At the Pentagon, Major General Pete Corelli was in charge of mobilizing forces.
When America goes to war, America needs to go to war.
The Army mobilized combat support units such as military police, engineer bridge companies, civil affairs, and psychological operation units, among others.
The soldiers faced with 3 days' notice. Some went home on a Friday, got notified on a Sunday they were being mobilized on Monday, never returned to their civilian jobs. Despite that, despite the extreme hardship associated with that, they still showed up.
I don't know, I'd rather be here right now than being back home.
The Army combined active and reserve units into force packages and deployed them to Kuwait, roughly in the order in which they would be needed as the campaign unfolded. In the north, the plan called for the mechanized 4th Infantry Division to enter Iraq from Turkey. Most of the division's equipment was aboard ship in the eastern Mediterranean, while personnel prepared to deploy from Fort Hood, Texas. But at the last moment, a major snag. The Turkish parliament refused to grant permission for the operation. The plan would have to be changed, and fast. In Kuwait, 2 concerns were affecting planning for the start of the war. One was Saddam's history of setting oil fields on fire at the start of hostilities. We all remember the nightmarish clouds of black smoke that choked the skies of Kuwait in 1991. If Saddam did it again, it would create an environmental and economic disaster for the people of Iraq. So the plan had to assure that the Iraqi dictator would have almost no warning before the attack. And the coalition had to make sure it could quickly seize the country's oil wells before they could be destroyed. The other major concern for the planners was the concentration of so many forces in tiny Kuwait. They were an obvious target for Saddam's missiles and whatever weapons of mass destruction he might have.
All the intelligence that I had access to and could read certainly indicated to me that there was a capability and probably an intent on the part of regime leadership to employ chemical or biological weapons.
The Army had an elegant solution to that one. Disperse the force straight ahead into Iraq.
They had a little boom box in the cab, and I reached over and pushed play, and we listened to Toby Keith, courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, as we came through the breach.
Two events triggered the running start. First, based on intelligence information, the president ordered a decapitation airstrike, targeting Saddam Hussein and senior regime leadership. Second, images from a Predator unmanned aerial vehicle convinced Army analysts that the regime had begun to ignite oil well fires in southern Iraq. It was time to move. This war would begin with a running start, unlike Desert Storm. Operation Iraqi Freedom was ground before air. The ground campaign actually began 2 days before formal air operations started. The concept of the running start meant that when the ground commander determined that he had enough of a force to begin offensive operations, he could move them out, even though some units were still deploying into the theater of operation.
At the same time that we crossed LD, we had forces flowing in, so we built combat power as we fought.
Spearheading the attack, America's 3rd Infantry Division, the 11th Attacked Helicopter Regiment, and 5th Corps Artillery, along with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force and elements of the British 1st Armored Division attacking into Iraq. The 101st Airborne Division would enter Iraq a day later. The 82nd Airborne Division was in reserve. And other units, including support units, were on their way. North and west of Baghdad, small units of Joint Special Operations Forces were conducting operations. The Air Force and Navy added strategic and tactical combat capabilities by air and sea.
So I was able to employ conventional land forces, receive the support of air power, have fires and special operations all working simultaneously in the same battle space with great effects.
The relatively small but powerful U.S. force faced an Iraqi army that still possessed impressive numbers. 17 regular divisions, plus 6 divisions of the better-trained Republican Guard, along with a sizable force of tanks, artillery, and armored vehicles, plus tactical ballistic missiles.
Our first hostile fire was before we even got to our tactical assembly area. We pulled around by a tactical airstrip that was being guarded by Patriot batteries, and right as our convoy got about even with the launchers, 2 missiles rippled off.
The launch of the missile was detected by USS Higgins, which provided a 90-second early warning to Army Patriot batteries. While some enemy missiles were off target and posed no threat, the Patriot missile batteries were 100% effective in destroying threatening inbound Iraqi missiles. There were 4 prongs to the coalition attack into Iraq. U.S. Marines and British forces moved to protect the southern oil fields and oil infrastructure at al-Basra and prevent an environmental disaster. There were more than 1,000 oil fields in the south, but just 9 were set afire. The 3rd Infantry Division's 3rd Brigade combat team raced across more than 140 kilometers to seize Talil Air Base and the Highway 1 crossing sites near An-Naziriyah. At the same time, the division's 3rd of the 7th Cavalry Squadron attacked across 210 kilometers to isolate Az-Samawa.
The speed with which we moved initially surprised me. Not that I didn't think we could move that fast, but I expected some form of resistance that just wasn't there.
Securing Talil Air Base provided a site for the logistics and aviation facilities the coalition needed to support the long march to Baghdad. At Talil, coalition forces began to take enemy prisoners of war. At Az-Samawa, the plans to seize the 2 bridges across the canal would effectively isolate Iraqi forces in town, keeping the highway